All right, Matthew, welcome to episode 29 of the Performance Advantage podcast. We're talking training with heart rate for endurance sports. One of my favorite topics, really enjoy it. And this episode of the Performance Advantage podcast is brought to you by smartmtbtraining.com and endurancetraininghub.com, currently running introductory limited time prices, $99 all access prices. Every single training plan, every single video, every single article, it's all in there.
And the app. $99 a year. That is a deal.
So,
well, let me just say, Will.
Oh, okay.
I know you love talking about heart rate, almost as much as I love talking about power meters. But One of the issues is you love talking about power meters and heart rate, whereas I hate talking about heart rate.
What?
Yeah, I think it's good, and we'll get into that a little bit, but power is just perfect. And heart rate is just It's just
For cycling, definitely.
Okay. You'll have to enlighten me then and tell me some more of the benefits for running for sure. But also, running power meters, we have an episode on that, but they've only just come out in the last couple of years. So heart rate is definitely way more accepted in running.
That's exactly right. What's not so readily accepted in mountain biking yet, Matt, is the brake power meter.
That is true.
There's been some developments, right?
Yeah. Well, we've had some awesome weather here for the last couple of weeks, so I've been doing a lot of testing because I don't really want to go out when it's raining with all my electronics because they're just not at the development yet where you can just take it out and splash it in a puddle. So I wait until the nice weather. And I've been testing some new supersized rotors, 246 millimeter rotors and 223 millimeter rotors.
Is that big?
Okay, it's gigantic actually. Standard in downhill right now is 203 millimeters, with about 2.0 millimeters thick, exactly 2.0 millimeters thick. So I've been testing 246 mil diameter, which is gigantic. 2.3 millimeters thick, and they're phenomenal. So we've been doing some comparison testing with those, and also have some new pressure sensors that I'm linking up with the power meters. So it's pretty exciting.
Pressure sensors. So does that measure the hydraulic pressure in the hose line?
It's basically a squeezy test.
All right.
So it's not as good as a power meter, but it's nice to sync them up just to kind of see how the pressure changes when you put bigger components in.
Okay. So, sweet. We touched on that in the brake power meter episode as well, comparing pressure with power.
Yeah. Well, so since I've been out testing a lot, I've been on Strava, right? Ooh. I told you I started using Strava, and I looked on Strava and I saw that you did something like a 10K race this weekend.
Yeah, I did.
I was like, wait, Will, why are you doing a 10K race when you just did a 100K race a week ago?
Yeah, it was only 5 days between them. Normally, I would not be doing any kind of racing the weekend after a 100K run. But we had the Lake City Athletics Club Champs, and we all have to complete a set race to register a time to qualify for our road relays team. New Zealand Road Relays is one of the biggest events on the New Zealand
in the world.
New Zealand Athletics calendar, and so I had to go. I wanted to support the club and I wanted to go along, and I was also quite intrigued to see how I would go. I was recovering really well, and so over the 10 kilometers, how would I respond? How badly would I go, compared to the 100 kilometer? How much is it taken out of me? So I ran a 37:30 10K, and so earlier in the year I did 33 something, just under 34 minutes, and so to run
That's a big difference.
4 minutes slower is considerable. And what was my big takeaway from that?
What was your big takeaway from that?
I had this limit at which I was able to run, and I wasn't running. I just couldn't run any faster, but I also wasn't going to slow down. It was sort of like a so it was around, I think my average pace around 340 minute per kilometer, maybe just a little bit over, and that's what I averaged for the marathon. So essentially my aerobic threshold. So there's I don't know. That was sort of what I took away from it. It was quite interesting that I had like this base level at which I can run, but I wasn't able to speed up. I was just, everything hurt too much, and the range of motion wasn't there, the fluidity. And I haven't looked at my power data to look at like my ground contact time, leg spring stiffness and things, but but likewise, I wasn't like an excruciating sort of cardiovascular stress like you normally would be in a 30-minute effort.
You just couldn't push above. We see that a lot, actually. Like
it's
with
standard with fatigue. Like we just went over with Kieran McPherson, professional multi-sport athlete now. He did a 16-hour adventure race in China. The next weekend, he won Xterra Off-Road Triathlon Japan. The weekend just been, which is the weekend after, the third weekend in a row, he went to Xterra China and came fourth and described what I've just described. Super fit, super and able to execute a good race, but had nothing above that.
Yeah.
You know? And I said to him, I was like, you just are describing fatigue, which makes complete sense.
Yeah, it takes a really in tune, with a mountain biker, especially to understand that that's happening with their body, when they can say, well, actually, I did this race and it went pretty good, but I just didn't have that extra gear. And that's why you taper, and that's why you make sure you go into your big events without that fatigue, because if you feel like that in your big event, that sucks. But I remember that exact feeling from the first 24-hour race that I did at Solo, and I got second in the 24-hour race, and me and my friend who won, we went and we did a double-header XC race weekend the very next weekend. And, well, he ended up, he needed an IV after the 24-hour race. He was pretty wrecked. He, fainted when he was standing there after the race. He was pretty ruined. But we get to the Saturday of the XC race, and first off, you're feeling a bit flat because you spent most of your time doing nothing. We just felt dead. We rode together basically like a group ride, like a fast group ride for the first XC race. But for him, the next day on the Sunday, he ended up winning the XC race. He just was able to turn it around really quickly, whereas I had another one of those days where I just felt absolutely dead. So it took a lot more out of me from the 24-hour than it did for him. And it's not a nice feeling though to not have that extra gear, for sure.
Man, it was not nice. It really wasn't. It's eye-opening, and what you're just saying also reminds me of our overtraining episode, where you get to this point and even I quickly dismissed the thought of, I should probably get back into training pretty soon, because I'm clearly losing something.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. You go in and you're overtrained, you're over fatigued, you haven't tapered well enough, whatever it is, and you go on, you go, wow, that performance was subpar. I need to do more. Yeah.
That's not always the way.
It's not.
It's hard to see that though when you're in the thick of it. And like the way you just described, you were thinking the same thing. So I'm glad we're able to talk this through over the podcast, because if I go on Strava and I see you doing any more training, I might have to come up to Rotorua and smack you around a bit.
Yeah. Well, I've got my wife to do that.
There
No
you go.
physical
Well,
violence, but
Yeah.
actual supportive guidance.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So, heart rate, Matt. Let's get
Okay.
into it.
Yeah, we should do the 5 Ws because that's a really good way for me to not talk as much crap on training with heart rate. Right?
All right, let's go. Why? Why does our heart beat?
Yeah, I guess what I wrote down is what is heart rate, you know? Well, like, what is a heartbeat? You know? That's like a existential question. Like, why does your heart beat? Like, everyone's heart beats. And some hearts beat at different rates. So right now, your heart's beating, my heart's beating. Our listeners' hearts are beating. Right? And no matter what we're doing, our heart is beating. And the reason our heart is beating is to transport blood that is freshly oxygenated from our lungs. And it's taking that oxygen attached to hemoglobin to our working muscles. And you might be thinking, well, actually, my muscles are not working right now because I'm sitting in the car driving to the supermarket, or I'm sitting in my office recording
Pretending
a podcast.
to work.
Yeah. Or that, yeah. But actually, our muscles are always active, even just supporting us in our posture. They're not dead, right? So they're always going to need oxygen so that they can use fuel to basically stay alive. And then once we start exercising, we're doing more forceful contractions. So then it's going to need more oxygen.
All right, and I'm going to throw something at you that we would hear a lot. I was breathing hard, and my heart rate went up because I was exercising hard. Now, can you please describe why or how our heart rate increases with exercise intensity?
Your muscles need more oxygen as your intensity increases. So
Yes.
that is what's changing at the most basic level. Are you looking for something more than that?
Well, what sort of blew my mind during my time at the university was being described how it's not really the demand of oxygen, it's the demand to get rid of CO2, and CO2 drives ventilation.
Yeah.
Which increases your heart rate.
Yeah.
And the increase in CO2 comes along with an increase in anaerobic work through the less efficient anaerobic metabolism of glucose, and that then results in a higher concentration of CO2, which you need to breathe off, which increases your heart rate. And that's how we're able to tell that an increase, like a high heart rate, relates to a non-aerobic work capacity. And
There you go. So you're probably thinking of the times, all those millions of hours you spent in the lab doing like a graded exercise test or a VO2 max.
Yeah.
And you see different stages, your heart rate goes up, the intensity continues to go up as you go through these VO2 max tests. And eventually the person's breathing really hard and the test feels really hard. And then soon after that, they're done.
Yeah. It's pretty much how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's what? Really? Is it? That covers that?
Well, yeah. That. I think that's a really nice basic explanation of what's going on with your heart rate.
All right. Now, someone yesterday asked me about max heart rate. And I tried to use the analogy. Let me know if this works, Matt. They were asking about max heart rate in relation to aerobic heart rate, because zone 2 is what I'm all about. Zone 2 aerobic heart rate training. And they said, but my max heart rate is really high. So maybe my aerobic zone's really high. And I sort of said, because you can jump really high, that doesn't indicate how long you can skip.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like
Definitely.
just because you
I
can
like
jump,
that one.
just because you can jump really high, it doesn't mean you can skip for 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
It is the exact same. Like it's jumping, but it's like sort of how high can you jump? How high can your heart rate go? That doesn't have a direct correlation with what your aerobic zone is,
Yeah.
or directly in correlation of like what your aerobic heart rate is.
Yes. Actually, super interest. Like this is pretty complicated because now we're talking about some of the shortcomings of training zones. Because normally, what someone will do is they'll do 220 minus your age to estimate your max heart rate, right? So, in theory, your heart rate shouldn't be able to get above this 220 minus your age. So for you at 20 years old, Will, your max heart rate should be 200, right?
Yeah.
220 minus your age. And then what you do is you set these very strict training zones based on your max heart rate. So that's one method to do it. There's a few other methods to set your training zones based on heart rate. But then as you kind of go down the list to your zone 2, zone 1, 2, your aerobic training zone, you'll be like, okay, well, since my max heart rate is estimated at 200 beats per minute, my aerobic training zone is something like 150 to 160 beats per minute. And I'm going to stick to that for every long, easy run. And actually, it just doesn't work like that. And I will use myself as an example. So first off, the 220 minus your age does not work at all for me. So I'm older than 30. My max heart rate should be, not above 190. But pretty much every time I go to a mountain bike race, my heart rate is over 200 for a long time. And sometimes I'll average 190. But I spend most of my time exercising aerobically and using power specifically. And I know that when I'm in my aerobic power zone, my heart rate is about 130. So those zones do not work for me. And they don't actually work for anyone all the time. They're just approximations. What do you have to say about that?
For sure, the 220 minus your age has been debunked. Like, we're still using it. It's like it's still out there. It's one of those fallacies that just was used in a clinical situation for non-athletes, and it becomes more and more wrong as the words leave my mind to be more descriptive. The older you get and the more trained you are. You're a lifetime endurance athlete, a highly competitive one, and you're 50 years old. Your max heart rate is going to be above 170. Okay, I'm saying going to be in terms of overall percentages, like 90% of people, you're going to be able to get your heart rate above 170 if you're 50 years old and you've been exercising for the last sort of 10 to 20 years, especially if it's more than that. And based off of that, you are going to be walking at around 100 beats a minute, and that will be your zone 2. And for someone who has not exercised their entire life, is 50 years old, sedentary office worker, that makes sense. Like, you don't want them heading out for a jog at 150 when their max heart rate is probably 170, because their resting heart rate is probably about 90. And so the 220 minus your age, not good. What I like to use, there's 2 formulas I use, which are the Phil Maffetone formula, developed by Dr. Phil Maffetone, and the Joe Friel, Andy Coggan 5-zone formula, developed by those 2 sports scientists. There are others, and I've found those 2 to situate in a way that, one, the Maffetone formula I've seen it appropriate for the majority of people we had through the lab. And I read the book, I read the science, makes sense. But then as an athlete gets older, they start to digress away from the trend, And that's more so because of the lack of data, like how many 50-plus-year-olds did we have in our studies, or 45-plus-year-olds? They were majority around our age. They had more time availability, easy to get in the lab. So they're around like 25 to 40 years old, maybe even younger. And so then the Andy Coggan Friel formula takes the 20-minute peak heart rate during a sort of 30-minute to 1 hour effort, and that's our 10 minutes, Matt.
No.
There's a 20-minute. So you have a look at your 20-minute peak threshold heart rate, and then you work out percentages based off of that. And I really like that one because it means directly, if you do have a high heart rate, I'm using air quotes here, it will incorporate that into your sustainable, like what is your sustainable threshold heart rate?
Is this a question to me?
Not sure. I think I sort of just went on a bit of a rant, and we got ahead of or away from the 5 Ws.
No, I think it's important to talk about, though, because...
so we went for what? And I think we summed that up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So we should we should get into why.
Yeah, but I want to hit on that actually really quickly, is those zones, and I think it's just a huge shortcoming on how we calculate zones, and it was probably some poor postdoc 40 years ago that was spent many hours in the lab having lots of people do graded exercise tests and measuring their oxygen consumption. And he came to the conclusion, or she, or this whole group, they came to the conclusion that, I actually can't even remember what the percentage of your threshold heart rates are for these zones, but these zones don't actually always mean that you're exercising within your zone 2, just because that's actually what your zone calculated as. So the things that you're kind of talking about there just hit on some of the shortcomings of estimating zones based on, say, a threshold or based on, normative data. I think it's kind of an issue.
Yeah.
But we still use it because it's the best way to do it. I just think it's not perfect.
It's definitely not. And why? I guess we'll get into why, because I'll talk more about, the when and the where.
Okay.
But
Let's do it then.
So we now we know what is heart rate. Okay, so it's a means of transporting oxygen, disposing of carbon dioxide, as well as nutrients around the body. It's important during exercise. Cool. So why would we use heart rate to monitor our training intensity? Matt, go.
Well, it's really important to monitor your training intensity because we know that exercising at a certain relative intensity can bring on certain adaptation that, say, your coach and you have decided you want to work on, right?
Yep.
So if we decide that an athlete has shortcomings when it comes to endurance capacity, we might spend a lot of time training at an endurance level. And we need to be able to guide that intensity some way. So heart rate is a nice, simple way to do it. You just put a strap on your chest, or you can just wear a watch. They work okay sometimes, just the watches. I know you don't like those very much. But you can very simply track your intensity as you go. And drop your intensity if you need to, or raise your intensity as you need to.
Yeah. And I would say why, elaborate on that with, it gives us heart rate, especially out of any of them, is an input measurement. So it directly correlates with the effort you're putting in.
Yeah, sure. Think about you right now. So your heart rate right now might be
I can check.
60 beats per minute. Tell us. Go on. Tell us with your
Keep talking
wristwatch.
while I find it.
Okay. It's a wristwatch, so it's kind of a guess. They're not perfect.
This one's pretty good. Are you still talking? Because I'm still trying
I'm still
to
talking, Will.
I'm still
Find
trying-
that heart rate. It should be super simple. Shouldn't it just be...
It should be. So it's 63.
Okay, so your heart rate is at 63 beats per minute, and I can tell all the listeners right now that you are just sitting there, being very still, just staring at your watch. Not even moving a muscle. But if you decided that suddenly you needed to go to the supermarket, and this was the analogy that I always gave in my applied sports science class that I taught at the university, I always gave this example of this donut shop. And I said, you guys are sitting there right now, and you're really excited. So your heart rate is probably at 90 beats per minute because you're listening to me talk about heart rate, and you love it, right? So that's really exciting. But what is more exciting is donuts at this donut truck called Crafted & Co. So if suddenly you decide you want to go get a donut at Crafted & Co. and you want to beat me to Crafted & Co., you're going to have to run as fast as you possibly can, right? Because I want to beat you to Crafted & Co. So as you stand up, your heart rate is going to increase because you're using more muscles. And as you start sprinting and you're going as hard as you can to get to Crafted & Co. to get in the line before me so you can get the best donut, your heart rate is going to increase relative to that effort.
Great analogy.
Yeah, I use that analogy pretty much every week, Crafted & Co. They do have some really good donuts.
They do, yeah. Okay, cool. And if we don't have access to power, pretty much, is the only other objective measurement of output, we're going to be looking at pace or speed. And those two, if you've been listening to this podcast for the last few weeks, or since the beginning, shout out to you. You also heard about us talk about the massive shortfalls in monitoring time and distance and the correlation of that pace and speed. Uphills, downhills, they have no real direct relation to your actual intensity. So we can use power, which is going to show you your output, or we can use heart rate, which is going to show you the input and work that you're doing. And this is super important because just monitoring it is going to tell you where you are training on that spectrum of super easy, sitting at your desk, broadcasting a podcast, to out sprinting Matt for Crafted & Co. donuts. Somewhere
Not going to happen.
Somewhere on that spectrum, you are training. And like Matt said, you and your coach, your event, you've looked it up, you've seen there are specifics you need to be working on. So now you can go, oh, look, there's this whole spectrum and I need to be right down the bottom, or I need to be right down the bottom 80% of the time and right up the top 20% of the time. I do not want to be right in the middle. So that's why. That is why we use heart rate. We use it to directly get an indication of our training intensity.
Yeah.
So then we get into the when and where, and also the who. And I think they sort of are all grouped together.
Yeah, I mean, those are 3 W's in one. So, yeah. Would you do you want to talk about, well, who should be using heart rate then?
Yeah, any endurance
Let's do that
athlete.
first. Yeah. And I will add to that, mountain bikers of all kinds. This is probably a good place for me to talk about why I don't hate, heart rate for mountain biking, but I can talk about, one of the major shortcomings. I think this is a good place to talk about. And this came from actually my first research study in my PhD, where we were looking at downhilling, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that when mountain bikers are going downhill, and it's the same for running, your effort is going to change. For mountain bikers, they can totally take away pedaling. But actually, as they're going down the hill, coasting 100% of the time, we made them coast, their heart rates actually went up, right? And we know that they weren't pedaling. So if they were using their heart rate as an indication of their effort, well, actually, it has nothing to do with how hard they were pedaling. So they're very different things when it comes to mountain biking, especially. So you take away that pedaling and your heart rate could actually go up because suddenly you have these huge impacts that you need to dampen so your head doesn't shake. Or you get kind of scared because there's a jump or something scary coming up, and you're using your upper body a little bit more. But I think actually using heart rate during mountain biking is really important as well, because you get a really good indication of how stressful overall, not just your legs, how stressful overall the whole mountain bike ride is, because there are other muscles that you need to use. So you know that if your heart rate does go up, it's because you are using muscles, right? And it could be additional muscles, including your upper body.
Yeah, and that's why you need that input measure with the output measure. So you have power, because if you just looked at power in this instance of a downhill mountain biker who coasted, did not pedal, you have 0. You're like, oh, cool, that was not stressful at all. You just didn't pedal down the hill. And then you look at heart rate, you're like, what were you doing down that hill? And together you can show that your heart rate may have been higher, 10 beats higher, with the increase in pedaling of whatever that looks like. 500 watts for 30 seconds every minute or whatever it is. Yeah. And then likewise, if we start to try and use heart rate, so we'll go back to the who of heart rate. It's, for me, it's an endurance athlete who's predominantly they're looking to improve endurance and monitor their training, and it becomes less applicable to someone who's looking to increase their anaerobic output. For me, I'm 90% of the heart rate based training that I'm doing myself or using for athletes is to slow them down, to avoid going too fast. Beyond a certain intensity, pretty much beyond anaerobic threshold, it's a guessing game. It's sort of throwing darts at the wall, trying to figure out what kind of intensity that is. What's your 170 and my 180? What's your 190 and my 165? After 3 minutes, after 5 minutes, it's like there's so many variables that go into it. But at steady state, we do know that you are able to produce or absorb enough oxygen, transport to the blood, excrete enough CO2, lactate, any of that kind of stuff. There's homeostasis there. It's all even. You can continue to go and go and go to the point where you listen to the Riding with Power, Critical Power episode, where it's like you can theoretically go forever. Above that, there are so many factors, variables that impact heart rate that you need that output measurement, that power, essentially.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned actually the steady state, because for most athletes, when they start an effort, it's going to take, up to 3 minutes for their heart rate to plateau at the same steady effort. So what most people are doing is when they start a given effort, they're starting a little bit fast, which is a problem. I think I talked about this we talked about this in the power one, and I said whenever I did an effort, I would start as hard as I could to get my heart rate up as fast as I could, and all that really happened is my power was high to start, and then I had to drop it back down during a steady effort, which is silly. But it takes, and that leads to overtraining because you're not monitoring your training properly. So now what I tell athletes is, well, actually, it's going to take up to 3 minutes for your heart rate to get up into your working level, if this is all you're looking at is heart rate. So ease into these efforts. The fitter you are, the better you are at transporting oxygen and offloading CO2, so you can actually hit a steady state more quickly. And that's one of the things that we look at when we look at changes in someone's fitness, is how quickly they can get their heart rate up into the working level at that power, and how quickly the heart rate then drops down once they reduce their workload. But that hitting a steady state is an important thing that I think a lot of people overlook is that it is going to take time for that heart rate to get up. So when you're doing a sprint, for example, with Usain Bolt sprinting me to Craft It and Co., like, I mean, it depends who wants it more badly, but he's probably going to beat me, right? Because he's a faster sprinter. Doesn't matter what our heart rates are. Doesn't matter. And actually, our heart rates might not get up to the maximum until we actually stop and are in line and are fighting each other, or just standing there, right? Yeah. Would you agree with that on the steady state? And that's it's important.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I said that the who blends into the where and why, how, what, why, when. Got it.
Yeah, when and where, actually, I have those linked together.
Oh, okay. So that's okay. We're allowed to do that?
Yeah. But then I also have different things listed under each one. So maybe we should talk about where.
Where?
Yeah.
To use heart rate?
Yeah.
I think I just did. Aerobic training.
Okay, there we go.
So here's what happens, especially in running. Like in swimming, it's like, oh, geez, it's so hard to monitor, to transmit a signal through a different medium, that being water. So I pretty much just won't even touch on that. The style of how swimming training is done, because it's in a fixed length pool, and you've tumble turns and things, and you can't directly overload the muscle system. We won't touch on swimming. Running, though,
I don't want to talk about it, honestly. Not because I don't know anything about it, but because I'm scared of water.
Yeah, we just that I pinned that video on Facebook. If you have not seen Matt's first triathlon story, it is hilarious. It has had thousands of views. Most of those are the same people just watching it over and over again. I watched it the other day. It's just so funny.
I'm glad you like it.
Anyway, Matthew, with running, it is so easy to train too hard.
Heard that.
Pardon?
Heard that.
Yeah. Because we have to fight against gravity and keep ourselves standing. It's a continuous large muscle group engagement pattern. And then more so when you start running uphill. What happens with a lot of athletes and runners as they enter the sport, they will run at a pace that sort of feels comfortable, uncomfortable kind of thing, where you're like, I want to be running fast enough that Strava looks good, but not so fast that this is just excruciating. And anything easier than that is probably not doing any good, because I can hardly feel it. And that's called the grey zone. And I am forever trying to get runners out of the grey zone. And by utilizing heart rate, you put the heart rate monitor on, you get your calculation. So the full maffetone, or MAF formula, maximum aerobic function formula, is 180 minus your age, and then it has plus or minus 5 based off of your training history. If you've been injured, you've regressed in training, you've plateaued, you've come back from sickness, you need to minus another 5, and then you just sort of plus or minus 5 on that to get your zone. So for me, 30 years old, there's 150 plus or minus 5, 145 to 155 approximately. That's giving you a good gauge. It's not going to work for 100% of everybody, but what I have seen is it slows 100% of people down. And initially I get the response, I can't train this slow, or my heart rate monitor is wrong, or my heart rate is just higher than this. Now, it takes a dedicated amount of time, about a month, to actually train your aerobic system, because the way aerobic base training works is it's a continuous stimulus of the aerobic muscles in order to get an increased mitochondrial biodensity. Mitochondria use the oxygen in your blood and fat to create, well, not create, but convert that stored energy into mechanical energy, which is used to make you, or allow you to go forward. If you continually stimulate this system, you'll get more mitochondria. You'll also increase the mitochondrial density of more of your muscle fibers. They become more efficient. You start to run faster or exercise faster at the same effort level. Now, what happens with a lot of people, they start off, they're running, and they're looking at their heart rate, and it starts creeping up, but their speed, because they want to maintain that 6 minute per kilometer, and they're going, yeah, this is what I need because this is what I need to do in the race, or this is what feels comfortable. And then to maintain 6 minutes per kilometer, as you start to step outside of your aerobic capability, your maximal aerobic function, you start to then stimulate an anaerobic system. So you're starting to buffer your ability to produce energy, convert energy aerobically, anaerobically. Now this is, for lack of a better word, toxic, and it's quite acidic, and it does not create a very productive environment for adaptation to mitochondrial biogenesis, increase muscular efficiency, increase oxygen, hemoglobin. It's more of a fight or flight response where you're like, yeah, I need this capacity to outrun something, but in terms of ongoing stimulation, you are in the gray zone, and you are quickly going to plateau or regress because you're not actually training for the specifics of your endurance event. Matt.
Wow. Can I just say that was beautiful?
Was it? I have done a lot of presentations.
Did you like black out?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. That's kind of endurance training in a nutshell. And you're really good at saying this because we have to actually explain this a lot, because it almost doesn't make sense.
Well,
right.
So initially, when I started to get into coaching, I was trying to slow a young triathlete down, and she said, why? Why do I have to stay at this heart rate? And she was 18 at the time, and training really hard. And I was saying, well, we'd put a heart rate on and slow down. Why? Now, to try and figure out actually why you need to slow down, it's quite a hard scientific explanation that does required me to think about it a lot, as opposed to, well, it's less stressful, better for you, more aerobic. Yeah, but why is that better? So that's it.
Yeah, I get. Yeah. With running, it has the added complexity that the faster you go, actually, the more damage you do. But the number one thing there is, we want to build those mitochondria, because I'm sure when you say the word mitochondria, everyone is thinking the same thing. Powerhouse of the cell, right? And we want lots of mitochondria and lots of capillaries, which, to transport even more oxygen through it in the blood. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That was a really good explanation. But if we're just looking at pace, we can never really get a great idea of what the demands are of that specific workload or pace, right? Because it could be that the pace is too high in that gray zone, and what's happening to heart rate is it's constantly increasing throughout the run, or even the ride, and it isn't able to stay at a steady state. And that's where heart rate comes in, and you are able to watch that, and then what you have to do is drop your pace, and that's when you can start to see benefits.
Yeah, see, it's so backward thinking. It's hard. When I committed to heart rate training after I'd been severely overtrained, I was like, this feels way too slow. This is a bit ridiculous, but I'll commit. I read the research, it made sense, and I just started to see these ridiculous benefits. increased energy throughout the day, increased like ongoing stamina, reduced reliance on needing like exogenous carbohydrates and supplements throughout my like long bike rides and runs, reduce like muscle soreness, increase consistency in my training, like less unplanned rest days or avoided high intensity sessions, and my overall base fitness got bigger, way bigger, the base, and I was then running way faster at every single intensity, because even a 5 kilometer run, which for me is, you know, like 16, 17 minutes, is still like 90 and 95% aerobic in nature. So by increasing that 90% capacity, I was able to get faster in every single distance.
Yeah. So would you say that once you started using your heart rate monitor more, that you were able to then be more able to stick within? I'm just losing the word. But once you started using heart rate, were you able to train more consistently and train better, train smarter than you were before you started using your heart rate monitor?
Yeah.
Would you attribute it all to that?
Yeah. Before that, I was more relying on pace. Like, I'd sort of pace zones that I had calculated based off of like the Jack Daniels formula, which is not the bourbon.
Oh, yeah.
The legendary running coach
Tennessee
with
whiskey.
his VDOT calculator, and it was just wearing me down, especially as a triathlete when a lot of these things don't replicate over from pure sports to triathlon, and so I just, from there it just progressed, and then I started to apply it to the athletes I was working with, was seeing even more benefits, and from there it snowballed into where almost every plan in the Endurance Training Hub has heart rate based descriptions and intensity sets.
Yeah, I still do that too. You know, I talked about why I don't like using a heart rate monitor as the main, you know, because power's better. I think power's better. But when you're able to combine power and heart rate, and, you know, you're seeing that now with running, now that you're using your running power meter more, is actually when you use both, you can start to notice other differences in your fitness as well, and in your workouts, and you have a new outlook on the analytics that you can get from those sessions. And when I really started to notice this is when we were doing really, really structured training on the Wahoo Kicker for your research study for your PhD.
Yeah.
We did the same session, the same 3 sessions every week for 6 different weeks, right? And that's a lot of times to be repeating the same thing in the same order. And it was in the name of science, right? So we had to control it really well. But since you're at the same power for the same intervals, you're able to see how your heart rate changes. So you can see, well, oh, okay, was my heart rate too high in week 3 when we got to the end of the block? Was I experiencing fatigue because my body was having to work a little bit harder at a given power output? Or am I exercising at the same power output and now suddenly my heart rate is way lower and it feels way easier? So when you're able to combine those things, it's actually really, really good. And that's where you get a whole new level of insight.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the combination of all of them. And yeah, I just find it, especially now that it's so accessible, especially to runners, you struggle to find a running watch now that doesn't have built-in optical heart rate. And now I'd like to get into some disclaimers, maybe. Points of note.
Oh boy.
So one mistake, very, very common mistake of heart rate training is average heart rate. I get this question or statement a lot. That was really good. I ran really fast. My average heart rate was only 140 for that workout. and I'll go, oh wow, that's a big improvement. Like your overall average is like 5-minute Ks. Let's have a look. Oh, I see. There was a reasonably conservative warm up, and then like an all-out attack for like 20 minutes, and then gradual,
curled up in a ball,
and then a
laid on the
gradual cool down. So like we spoke about, it takes a while for your heart rate to like continually increase. So you start your warm up, and it'll take a while for your increased circulation to catch up with the demands of the working muscles, and then you go way too hard. Say you're running at like 130, then you go for 160, and then you come back down for a bit of a cool down, or you go down a hill, and overall you get a 140 average, which is smack bang in the middle of zone 2, perfect. Obviously, that's not how it worked out.
No.
That's not how it played out. So it's important that when we talk about zones and heart rate, it is what am I looking for? Like current number, not the overall average.
Yeah, definitely. And this is where coaches kind of come in. And, by this point, I've looked at thousands of workout files, right? And, one of the first things I do is I click in Training Peaks. I click on the workout, and it shows average heart rate, and it'll show max heart rate, average power, max power. I look at all 4 of those. And sometimes I don't even need to go in any further. So if it was a prescribed endurance ride, for example, I see average 140 beats per minute, max heart rate 100 and maybe 60 beats per minute, average power 200 and something watts, max power 400 watts. I'm like, okay, actually, that was a pretty good endurance ride. I don't need to click through it anymore. But a lot of times, what you'll actually see is average heart rate, like you said, 140, and then max power, 1500 watts. You're like, wait a minute, I know that shouldn't be happening because this was a prescribed endurance ride. I need to go in and look at that, even though the averages look just right. And then you see that actually, okay, this was a sprint session. That was unplanned. That's a lot different than an easy ride or an easy run. So we need to take that into account then when we look at the rest of the training. And probably what we need to do is change the training plan for the future. Yeah, on the fly kind of thing.
It's interesting to actually say what you look at. Yeah, I'll open the file and I'll have a glance, especially aerobic one. Generally, they're pretty good. You can see the trace as well if you've opened it. Otherwise, I'll have a look, and I know for my ongoing athletes, their paces, their speeds, their power outputs, and you can get that number, that average number. You go, well, that's pretty high or quite fast for this kind of workout, but the heart rate doesn't look too bad. So then I jump in and look at peaks. So Training Peaks gives you peak 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, like all the way through. And then you see this big peak of 170 beats for 4 minutes. And there's, again, this unplanned effort in there. Or a point in which they just decided not to chill out on the uphill. And like a lot of the times that's not a big deal. Like it's just part of training and you just have to have fun. Maybe you're running with a friend or something. But it is good when you have, that's our job, right? Question these kind of things. And you can do this yourself. A lot of Strava and everything will have time and zone. It's a really good one to look at and just have a glance over if you got the Strava analysis pack. It's like 35 New Zealand dollars, about 20 US bucks for a year. And you can quickly click on your workout time and zones. Wow, okay, my overall average looks like what it should be, but it shows I ran, rode, swam, whatever, for 20 minutes of the 1 hour in zone 3. Now that is not what was prescribed.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
So that's the average heart rate mistake, I guess. So
Yeah,
I'll call
yeah.
it. And then I have one more.
Go ahead.
Data integrity. Now this
Before actually you move on, I need to
head.
actually. Yep, you can't move past this one because I have something else to say about it. I just wrote an article about this. Even looking at average power and average heart rate throughout, say, a climb, it can also get really, really tricky as well. So I just wrote an article about that. It's on mtbphd.com. I wrote it for Team SWAT, a power meter manufacturer, analyzing some of their power data. And actually, we can take it a step further. We'll save this off the podcast, but we can look at power even more in depth and show that, average and just maximum don't cover everything as well. So there's that as well. But we won't talk about it because it takes like 16 hours. So
Yeah. What was that? Data integrity.
Yes.
Man. I'm not really sure if this is like helpful information or just me having a whinge.
Okay. Well, it's okay to whinge. This is your podcast, man. Come on.
Our podcast.
Well, this is our podcast, and I say whinge.
All right.
Yep.
Heart rate is inherently variable or inaccurate, I guess. What is everyone has looked at their number and been like, "What?
Yep.
They'll be just cruising along, easy pedaling, easy as ride, just going for a nice Sunday spin, or they're just jogging along and it's reading 180. Right? Happens to everyone. Often, if you're wearing a heart rate strap, it can pick up the static electricity from your super high-tech sports clothing, and this
Or
happens.
wind can flap it.
Yeah, this can happen to me. This happens to me a lot. It picks up cadence, your running cadence, as the clothes rub against you as you, oscillate. You will, your heart rate will fixate on your cadence. That can happen on wrist space as well. And then wrist space is just, oh man, it's so inconsistent. It can be reliably inconsistent, but just because it relies so heavily on a close surface-to-surface contact with zero light, it works off of lasers. So if you let
Frickin' lasers!
if you let external light in under the watch, which is so easy to do, especially when you're sweating and things, now you've skewed the line of sight of the infrared lasers to your...
Yeah, well, you made a meme about this, didn't you? And
Oh,
how
I
does
did too.
Garmin... how does Garmin get your heart rate from a wristwatch? And they use a random number generator,
Yeah.
don't they?
Yeah. So what is so annoying about that, as a coach who's trying to monitor someone's weekly training or individual training session, and you go, look, yep, this next month is predominantly aerobic in nature. We're trying to do base phase. We're rebuilding, and you have a look, and there's 10% of the last month has been spent in zone 5. You're like, what? Why is just purely because it's a cumulative addition of all of these like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 180 beats per minute spikes, and that can, or it'll drop right off, right? It might just read 60 for 10 minutes. And then when you're looking, if you're just using heart rate to monitor your overall training load, through Strava or Training Peaks, Endurance Training Hub, Garmin, you're getting some kind of score or output of training load. Now that's skewed, and it's like it can be very variable just because it relies so heavily on technology that monitors it's indirect technology.
Yeah, it's only 2019 though, Will. Like, we can't expect technology to be at a level that's acceptable,
All right. So then having power is
It's good.
is the next best. You can now we're
That's the
looking
very
more
best.
at, for cycling especially, a direct technology that is directly correlated to the level of output. You're pushing on the pedals, and I am going to put together a post around the downfall of the weight issue with running power that I've come across.
Oh boy.
And,
yeah, we talked about this.
Because it's just an indirect measurement, and your weight fluctuations can have a huge impact on the amount of power you're producing, or needing to produce to run at a certain speed. Whereas in cycling, you have a crank-based strain gauge. So if you put a backpack on full of bricks, it'll directly show that you
As
now
you do.
putting this much power through the cranks or spindle or wherever it's measuring it. Whereas you put that backpack full of bricks on and go for a run, and you didn't adjust your weight within the Stride app, now it doesn't look like you are producing any power at all. It just looks like you're running super slow.
That is a shortcoming. That sounds like a very detailed blog post.
I've been writing it for the last week, and I'm just it's too large. It's too in depth. I think people
That's like another PhD.
glaze over. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Anywho, back to heart rate.
Yeah,
What else?
well, I think
What
that
else
really-
do people
that-
need to know?
Well, the one thing that I would like to cover, and because I get asked this a lot, is what other things might change heart rate besides you exercising. And we can just talk on those really, really quickly. And that's potentially, well, when you're dehydrated, your heart rate could change. And so that's as you go throughout an exercise session, your heart rate might increase throughout the session because your plasma volume has reduced. So suddenly your heart has to beat more times per minute. That's just one example where heart rate can change throughout a session. And then also, when you're super duper excited, like on the start line of a race, your heart rate could be really high, or maybe you had too much coffee, like I usually do, or too little coffee, like I never do. And, those kind of things can all impact your heart rate. So it's actually, since it's a measure of your body's response to something, there's lots of things that can come into play when you're looking at heart rate.
There are, and that's again why I'm predominantly relying on it for aerobic-based training. Because if you have just had the most hectic day in the MTB PhD cave, and you've just been blowing up brake power meters and trying to figure out new algorithms, and you just been on your 10th coffee, up for 2 days, and you head out and your heart rate is through the roof, it's telling you should probably slow down. Like,
you may be actually telling me something here I didn't know about myself. But yeah, this is all sounding... Go on. Tell me more.
And you're going out for an aerobic ride or run, the stress level on your whole system, the cortisol, the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems are so out of whack that it's like there is no capacity for the additional demand of your normal running pace or cycling power. You need to just really wind things back until you can exercise at a rate at which your heart rate is now in your zone 2. And that's really, really good to maintain the consistency in your training, so you're not pushing through after what you would consider non-correlatorily, something that doesn't relate to exercise.
I don't know what that
you have a big day at work where you're like, no, I need to do these intervals, I need to get this run done, I need to do these hill efforts, when in actual fact your work life just really, really impacted your training in this situation. Whether you like to admit it or not, there's a reason your heart rate is through the roof.
Stress is stress. And that leads me to probably the final thing that we can talk about, and that is looking at your resting heart rate and kind of tracking that over time. So for athletes that want to take it to the very next level, I know that you have your watch and you are tracking your heart rate every morning when you wake up, just because it does it. And so with athletes, I want to take it to the next level. Just check your resting heart rate every morning to get an idea of, over time, how your heart rate changes based on your training. So you can start to notice when you're fatigued. And this gets into a whole new thing about heart rate variability, which we need probably another episode just on that. But, you know, to track your resting heart rate every morning when you wake up, just measure it for a few seconds. We use a pulse oximeter. You can get them really cheap. Pop your finger in.
The new
Tells you your
Garmin's
heart
have
rate.
pulse ox built into it.
What?
Yep.
There you go. There you go.
Yep.
So it's just
yeah,
a nice
that is
that's
that's outside, I think, of the scope. Like, it's good to note. But then when we look at heart rate reserve and we look at exercise post-oxygen consumption, and that's not training with heart rate. Like, that is just a whole nother world of the, I guess, application of heart rate in recovery and monitoring.
Yeah. We'll save it for next time. Not next time, because we already have an episode lined up for next time. Should we say it?
Go.
Or should we send a confirmation email first? Well, let's send a confirmation email, but it's going to be pretty exciting next week, actually.
I'm super amped for next episode. So let's summarize it, Matt, in 3 quick points. Training with heart rate. Go.
Heart rate is good. Power is better. And if you have too many coffees or not enough coffees, your heart rate will tell you.
Yes,
that's my 3.
So my 3 points would be, it is a great way to make sure you are training at the correct intensity. It's normally right, and you are normally training too hard. So that's
2 points
for a month. All right, well then that's it, Matt.
There you go. That's all you need to say. That's really good.
3.
That's good.
Love it.
Very good.
Love it. I love it. All right, Matt. Have a good week. Look forward to chatting with our special guest next week.
See ya.